Hello, friends. Patrick McFarland here of the Liberty Weekly podcast, coming at you with another episode. This one is episode 180, and the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/180. It would bring up the website here for those of you watching the video version on Odyssey or YouTube or rockfin.com. That's an announcement I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Here you can see the website, and I've added a really nice link here, libertyweekly.net/subscribe, where you can find all the platforms where the Liberty Weekly podcast is featured, and go check that out. So today's episode, I'm going to be talking about an article that might be released when you listen to this, but might be released a couple days later. But this is my next article. As you know, I've been working very hard on producing articles over at the Libertarian Institute. And one thing I've been trying to do is not focus on, news or anything like that, but do my own deep dive investigations into certain topics. And I present that to you on the podcast. They're usually turned into video documentary forms or something like this, something that where it's maybe not a big project like my Uyghur genocide allegation documentary, but just something that I'm looking into here. So the title of this episode, as you probably already know, is "For Haitians, Earthquake Relief Comes with U.S. Marines and COVID-19 Vaccines." For those of you who may or may not know, because the news has rightfully been pretty obsessed with the Afghanistan issue lately, Haiti suffered an earthquake, another earthquake. This was a 7.2 earthquake that occurred last Saturday. So I think about 8 days ago. I'm recording this on Sunday, August 22nd here. But there was another earthquake in Haiti. This one, thankfully, does not seem to be as intense in terms of the humanitarian cost as the one in 2010, but it's a serious issue. And of course, the earthquake comes on the heels of what we covered on this show in July. The president of Haiti was assassinated, Jovenelle Moise. And, unfortunately, I spent that whole episode mispronouncing his name. But I've had a bit more time to familiarize myself with this topic. And you can see here, that was libertyweekly.net/174, episode 174, where we really covered in depth the assassination of Jovenelle Moise. So the country has been relatively stable, I suppose you would say. It was Claude Joseph, who was the prime minister of Jovenelle Moise, who kind of assumed control of the country for a little bit, but then afterwards, his successor, Ariel Henry, was put into power in Haiti. And I have a piece up here by Kim Ives of Haiti Liberté, and the situation, I covered in the other show, but basically it was Claude Joseph was the prime minister for Moise. Henry was named to be the new prime minister the day before Moise was assassinated. And then before Ariel Henry could be sworn in as the new prime minister, Moise was assassinated. And so, Kim Ives does a little bit of coverage here on Ariel Henry and that whole situation. I'll put this link in the show notes page. And he kind of covers how in the aftermath of the assassination, Henry was nowhere to be found, and Claude Joseph seized power in the way that Kim Ives puts it. But then there was a tense rivalry, he says, between the two men. He ultimately concludes that Haiti's Bouge class, their bourgeois class, quickly embraced Henry's challenge to Joseph with the July 9th Protocol of National Agreement Accord. He said, although it had rejected his initial appointment. So some interesting facts there. The bourgeois' hopes that he would make a coalition government to their liking were dashed, however, he writes, when he announced his new cabinet, in which most of the key posts remained in the hands of those appointed by Jovenelle Moise. Claude Joseph remained as foreign minister, Rockefeller Vincent as justice minister, Michel Patrick Beauvais as finance minister, and Clement as health minister. And of course, the United States is involved in this whole situation. Kim Ives writes, Washington tried to hide its role in pressuring for the switch from Joseph to Henry. We are taking the side of the Haitian people, they say, says U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price in a July 19th press conference. This is a dialogue that has been ongoing between various Haitian political stakeholders. So Ives kind of concludes, nonetheless, both Joseph and Henry are U.S. allies. The National Endowment for Democracy, an institute spun out of the CIA in 1983 to implement Washington's regime change and neo-colony maintenance agenda worldwide, backed Joseph as the pro-coup human rights and student as a pro-coup human rights and student leader in the run-up to the 2004 overthrow of President Aristide. In concert with Joseph's role, Henri was part of the U.S. concocted Council of Wise People, which provided the window dressing to facilitate the transfer of power from Aristide to de facto Prime Minister Gerard Latortue after the February 29, 2004 coup. So all this is going on in the background while another earthquake strikes Haiti. And this occurred, last Saturday. So I think that was the 14th of August. So that's when the earthquake hits. And I really do not want to engage in disaster porn, as some people have been calling it. And I'll discuss that about my article, coming up here. But the death toll currently from Haiti's earthquake rises above 2,200 people. And, all disasters are catastrophic. It's a nightmare, unfortunate, tragic circumstance. However, the 2010 earthquake, I believe the death toll was like 200,000 people. And I'm sure that included people who died in the actual earthquake, but also people who died in the aftermath from the earthquake. So Time magazine writes, Haiti Civil Protection Agency said Sunday that the toll from this month's magnitude 7.2 earthquake has grown to 2,207 people, with 344 people still missing. The previous figure had been 2,189 on Wednesday. The agency said via Twitter that 12,268 people were injured and nearly 53,000 houses were destroyed by the earthquake. And of course, they go on and say Samaritan's Purse is the name of this U.S.-based aid agency. They opened a field hospital Saturday, and as we'll see, Samaritan's Purse, it's being aided by, I believe, the Coast Guard in their Joint Task Force Bravo, which is based out of Honduras. So they are using helicopters to fly, to transport a field hospital to Haiti. But they say that the authorities are struggling with security at distribution points. Gangs have hijacked aid trucks and desperate crowds have scuffled over bags of food. So this is the narrative that we're seeing. And I don't really doubt that a lot of this probably is taking place. However, we're also getting this narrative that frustrations and violence is flaring up in Haiti as earthquake survivors plead for aid. And there was some things I've seen around in the media about how desperate folks are, how they don't think that the Haitian government is going to come and help them out, and they're waiting for aid. It really just kind of makes it sound like we're waiting for the U.S. State Department to come around. And that's kind of why I decided to write this article, because, of course, there were calls for Joe Biden to send the Marines into Haiti. And that's why I wrote my first piece, Uncle Sam Must Cease Intervention in Haiti. And I talked about, the history of intervention, U.S. intervention in Haiti. Of course, one problem that you run into when you cover Haiti, especially as kind of a novice, so I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm an expert on the Haiti situation, but one thing that you run into is the fact that Haiti has such a long and complex history, and it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around it in a few months, as I've tried to do here. So, in full disclosure, I do my research and I put my links up there and all this stuff, but I'd really encourage people to dive into it. And there are other folks, good folks that I link to who are more familiar with Haiti than I am. But at the same point, I have gone through and done a bunch of research on this. But from what I've been able to gather is that there were calls for the United States to send in Marines to Haiti. They kind of waffled on the decision, but ultimately they did decide not to deploy Marines to Haiti. And of course, that's with the caveat that there was a small detachment that was sent to guard the U.S. Embassy in Haiti. But the narrative coming out said a broader deployment was not on the agenda at this moment. And as of the point of recording, I'm not aware of a larger deployment. However, after the earthquake happened, as I write in my article, despite Washington's decision not to deploy Marines to Haiti after the July assassination of Haitian President Jovenelle Moise, the devastation of last Saturday's 7.2 earthquake has provided U.S. leaders the cloak of humanitarian aid for doing just that. So again, I noticed the narrative in the mainstream media coverage of the situation is that Haitians are in dire need of aid, and that it must come from the U.S. State Department. One of the big and the addition to that is that there are folks out there who are attacking aid trucks, and they are, when the aid rolls up, a whole crowd descends, and there's chaos and pandemonium as they try to fight for these supplies that they need. And of course, here's the solution, because U.S. Marines are just sitting there, and of course, for some reason, it's their job to go across the world and provide humanitarian aid. I write, in an effort reestablished under the 2010 earthquake response moniker Joint Task Force Haiti, and that's just because Joint Task Force Haiti was the name of the task force that assisted the reconstruction efforts after the 2010 earthquake. And of course, there is a detachment, as I cover here, of 200 Marines that departed Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, for Haiti on Wednesday. So this was last Wednesday, just this last week. That would be the 18th of August. For Haiti, the detachment is supported by 420 sailors and several ships and aircraft from the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. So overall, I would estimate the deployment of U.S. personnel, military personnel, to be around 2,000, maybe 2,500. While the numbers that I've seen from the original 2010 deployment were, I think, 22,000 U.S. soldiers, military personnel that were deployed directly. And that was under the name Joint Task Force Haiti as well. So the mission, the ostensible mission of the Marines, is to provide security for Joint Task Force Haiti, who will work to help find stranded survivors from the disaster, deliver medical supplies, and provide direct medical assistance to the rescue and recovery efforts. Now, these Marines will join other U.S. forces that are already deployed to Haiti. Some of these forces were deployed within the first 24 hours. So this includes U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon aircraft, quote, and a 14-person situational awareness team from Special Operations Command South. And this 14-person situational awareness team is stationed at the U.S. Embassy, where Marines, again, have already been deployed to provide security for the U.S. Embassy in Haiti in the anticipated political unrest that was to take place after the assassination. So also deployed is the USNS Burlington, a fast transport vessel. And I wanted to bring up a picture of the Burlington for those of you who are watching the video version of this on Odyssey or on Rockfin, and just kind of get a size of the ships that are being deployed to this. So here's a picture of the USS Burlington. It's a big boat. It's a pretty big boat. And in a way, it kind of looks like, something you would deploy like amphibious transport ships from. In fact, I think that is the purpose. So also deployed are 8 helicopters, 3 UH-60 Blackhawks, 3 CH-47 Chinooks, and 2 HH-60 Pavehawks from Joint Task Force Bravo in Honduras. And that's what I was talking about before, to provide medical air support. Now, 4 of those helicopters have been tasked with moving a surgical hospital per the request of Usaid. And that's an important thing, per the request of Usaid. It's something that we'll be exploring later on in this article as well. But let's take a look at what this UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter looks like. For those of you who aren't intimately familiar, it kind of looks like, for those of you listening, it's what you would kind of picture a U.S. helicopter to be, the Blackhawk helicopter. Black Hawk Down, I assume it's kind of the same thing, the same helicopter. And the Chinooks, I believe, are the dual rotor helicopters. We're just looking it up here for the video version. Yeah. So these are Chinook helicopters, the dual rotor ones, kind of the transport ones. And Pavehawks, HH-60 Pavehawk helicopters. We're going to look that one up too, so you get a picture of that. And that's the one that has kind of that lance thing that's poking out the front. So it's not quite like a Black Hawk, but it has that lance thing. And I wonder if those are kind of used for like water rescue operations or something like that. Like I said, 4 of those helicopters have been tasked with moving the surgical hospital to Les Cayes. Again, apologies for my French. But there are other forces there as well. This includes the USS Arlington, which is an amphibious transport dock that is equipped with a surgical team and landing craft capabilities. Also deployed are a number of Coast Guard assets, including 3 H-60 Jayhawk helicopters and several Coast Guard cutters. So the thing I'm trying to portray here, and yes, the USS Arlington is also a relatively large boat, as you can, well, a ship, a relatively large ship, as you can see on the video version as well. Let's see these Jayhawk helicopters. I'll try and describe it to you for the audio version. This looks like kind of what you would expect. Yeah, the Coast Guard, when you see movies where they go out into the stormy ocean and rescue, like The Perfect Storm, right? That movie. That's what you'd expect, where the little cable comes down and the guy gets out on that little basket thing and they pick up sailors who are out in the ocean. So yes, another important point of this is these forces will be equipped with plenty of COVID-19 vaccines for Haiti. And this comes in the context that Haiti is a country which, at least until Moise's assassination, remained largely free of the global North's COVID-19 response. So as you can see, here's this local news report from coastal Virginia. USS Arlington departs Naval Station Norfolk for Haiti disaster relief after powerful earthquake. And as you can see, there's a nice kind of puff piece interview with the commander, Lieutenant Colonel Corey Murtaugh. He's an ESG-2 plans officer with the U.S. Marine Corps. And as I kind of identify in this piece, you know, I have no doubt that these folks are, the soldiers that are deployed to Haiti are well-intentioned. There's no doubt about that. He says there's the danger of just being able to respond in time. Murtaugh said, it's a heavily damaged area, and I think the need is going to be great. There are a lot of structural collapses. There's going to be a lot of recovery efforts for probably people trapped in buildings. But, as the story mentions, COVID-19 is also a serious threat to people on the island. At Naval Station Norfolk, crews loaded the vessel with food, water, COVID-19 vaccines, medical supplies, and rescue equipment in less than 24 hours. And he says, Murtaugh says, to be able to get on the ground and provide immediate assistance to people that absolutely need it at a critical time when they're suffering, it's an honor to do it. And that is admirable. That is admirable. But we'll talk more about that in just a second here. He says, this is one of the most satisfying missions that we do because you get to see the immediate results of helping your friends and allies and just helping people. It's such a worthwhile and important mission. It's one of the most rewarding ones I've ever done. And bravo to that. You know, I want to give credit where it's due here. According to officials, U.S. forces are prepared to remain in Haiti for up to 4 months or more as needed. And of course, what I'm trying to illustrate here with everything that we've talked about so far is that this is a large deployment. Now, of course, it's not as large as it was in the wake of 2010, but this is a large deployment. You have multiple vessels, large Navy vessels. You have a bunch of cutters from the Coast Guard. You have a whole bunch of helicopters, and I'm sure that the fast transport vehicles are equipped with amphibious landing craft. These efforts also follow a pre-earthquake deployment of agents and personnel from the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, which are both ostensible domestic policing agencies. Yes, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, which, you know, is kind of a Nazi phrase that came about in the terror wars after 9/11. All of a sudden, I believe it was after 9/11, but all of a sudden we created the Department of Homeland Security, like the Department of Motherland Security, which, you know, you would think are both domestic policing agencies. But I guess their missions include going to Haiti and aiding Haitian officials in the investigation of Moise's assassination. Now, as I said before, while the humanitarian goal of aiding Haiti in the wake of human catastrophe is laudable, humanitarian efforts in Haiti have a disastrous past, and that is just a fact. And it's a fact that we're going to explore here. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about rockfin.com and the way that I'm going to be handling bonus content on the show. Now, rockfin.com, if you haven't heard of it, is kind of like a Netflix for independent content producers. You pay one subscription fee, and it will give you access to all of the premium content on the site from all of your favorite content producers. And part of the reason why I joined it is just the caliber of independent reporting that's going on that website. But The Last American Vagabond is on there. Of course, Monica Perez and Brad Binkley from the Propaganda Report is there. The Conscious Resistance is on there. The Ripple Effect podcast is on there. Vanessa Beeley, who did a lot of great coverage of the Syrian War, identifying exactly what the U.S. government was doing there. She's on there. Jason Burmis is on there. I'm just trying to think. Ben Norton and Max Blumenthal are on there from The Gray Zone. Whitney Webb from Unlimited Hangout is on there. Jimmy Dore is on there. So there's Richard Grove is on there. And so I'm just looking. Abby Martin is on there as well from Media Roots Radio. Around the Empire with Joanne Leone, a new friend of the show, is on there, as well as Kyle Anzalone with Conflict of Interest will be joining. And we're all going to be doing bonus content together that will be on rockfin.com. So if you'd like to subscribe, don't miss out on that. Now I have, a bit more of an incentive to provide bonus content, because as much as I really love and cherish my Patreon supporters, there's not a lot of incentive to create bonus content when only 3 or 4 people are going to watch it. But now all of that will be available to Rockfin subscribers for just $9.99 per month. If you'd like to subscribe to Rockfin through my link and get access to all these different creators and all their bonus and premium content, go to libertyweekly.net/Rockfin and subscribe through my link. Now, if you don't want to pay a subscription fee, but you do want access to all my Liberty Weekly bonus content, I will be releasing it on Odyssey, but I'm going to be charging LBC for it, which is the cryptocurrency that Odyssey runs on. So that content will be available a la carte there. Also on float.app, you can support for cryptocurrency. Thank you guys so much for considering to subscribe on Odyssey or on rockfin.com. So at the same time that U.S. military personnel and U.S. aid workers, I am sure, now what I mean U.S. aid, not as in USAID, the organization, but aid workers in general, NGO aid workers, I'm sure that the people on the ground who are actually doing hard work have goodness in their hearts and they really would like to help out the Haitian people. However, it is the overall cumulative effect of this, kind of behind the scenes in the interests that are going on behind the scenes, which are very detrimental to Haiti itself and especially Haitian sovereignty. Indeed, Haitians are correct to identify the conceit of humanitarian assistance from a nation that has invaded, occupied, and meddled in that country for over a century to calamitous effect. And that is the conceit of the United States in thinking that they're just going to come in on a white horse and save Haiti when they have been instrumental in undermining Haitian sovereignty for over 100 years. Now, I have this article here, which is from Haiti Liberté. It's written in French, but I had it translated. Okay, here we go. And this op-ed is penned, "Will the Marines disembark again?" So it details everything I said. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Not only did the earthquake happen on August 14th, but there was also a tropical storm that hit on the Monday following, so like 3 days after the earthquake, leaving lots of people people who lost their homes to camp in mud. So it says, under this pretext, the U.S. Marines will be deployed at the request of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, which we're going to be talking about. And it appears from my research that USAID is directing the relief efforts. So, of course, we're going to be talking about that. But I think the criticism here coming from Haiti Liberté, it shows a picture of U.S. Marines in Haiti, and the caption says, "No to the U.S. navies in Haiti." So in this way, the Haitian population, they write, who has suffered one misfortune after another between bad rulers and the reaction of nature in the face of so many aggressions, will now have to face the arrogance and the repressive desire of the army of the dominant imperialist power of the region accustomed to killing, rape, and torture. Haiti Liberté rigorously denounces this upteenth Yankee landing under humanitarian pretexts to defile once again the Haitian soil of a bunch of, apologies, French names I'm not going to try and butcher. The Haitian people must remain vigilant, mobilized if our country is faced with daily earthquakes and storms from our governments. It is because the United States has always imposed local lackeys on us, not only to excessively destabilize the country, but also to safeguard and defend their hegemonic interests. So we should listen to the voices from Haiti. I'm not going to sit out here and pretend that Haiti Liberté represents all Haitians. However, it's a voice from Haiti. And I think it's one that we should listen to. I documented in some of my other episodes on Haiti the history of the U.S. invasion of Haiti and its occupation of Haiti. We'll just touch on that briefly here. Invasion in 1915 and occupied through 1934. So just a brief thing here. As a result of increased instability in Haiti in the years before 1915, the United States heightened its activity to deter foreign influence. Between 1911 and 1915, 7 presidents were assassinated or overthrown in Haiti, increasing U.S. policymakers' fear of foreign intervention. So we're going to intervene. In 1914, the Wilson administration, it always starts with Woodrow Wilson, administration sent U.S. Marines into Haiti. They removed $500,000 from the Haitian National Bank in December of 1914 for safekeeping in New York, thus giving the United States control of the bank. In 1915, Haitian President Jean Vilbrun Guillarme was assassinated, and the situation in Haiti quickly became unstable. In response, President Wilson sent the U.S. Marines to Haiti to prevent anarchy. In actuality, the act protected U.S. assets in the area and prevented a possible German invasion. The invasion ended with the Haitian-American Treaty of 1915. The articles of this agreement created the Haitian Gendarmerie, essentially a military force made up of U.S. citizens and Haitians and controlled by the U.S. Marines. The U.S. gained complete control over Haitian finances and the right to intervene in Haiti whenever the U.S. government deemed necessary. The U.S. government also forced the election of a new pro-American president, Philippe Soudre d'Arteguave, by the Haitian legislature in August 1915. The selection of a president that did not represent the choice of the Haitian populace increased unrest in Haiti. Now, following the manipulation of the 1915 elections, the Wilson administration attempted to strong-arm the Haitian legislature into adopting a new constitution in 1917. This constitution allowed foreign land ownership, which had been outlawed since the Haitian Revolution, as a way to prevent foreign control of the country. Extremely reluctant to change the long-standing law, the legislature rejected the new constitution. Lawmakers began drafting a new anti-American constitution, but of course the U.S. forced the president, the Haitian president, to dissolve the legislature, which did not meet again until 1929. So some of the gendarmerie's more unpopular policies, and remember this was a force that was under the control of the Marine Corps, included racial segregation, press censorship, and forced labor. This led to a peasant rebellion from 1919 to 1920. The U.S. Senate sent an investigative committee into Haiti in 1921 to examine claims of abuse, and subsequently the U.S. Senate reorganized and centralized power in Haiti. Again, after the reorganization, Haiti remained fairly stable. Of course, this is coming from the State Department itself, this article I'm reading. Haiti remained fairly stable and a select group achieved economic prosperity, though most Haitians remained in poverty. In 1929, a series of strikes and uprisings led the United States to begin withdrawal from Haiti. In 1930, U.S. officials began training Haitian officials to take control of the government. In 1934, the U.S., in concert with FDR's good neighbor policy, officially withdrew from Haiti while retaining economic connections. And you'd be a fool to believe that our meddling in Haiti ended there. So that's just, kind of a brief history there, but here's another one. Haiti is a graveyard of failed NGO projects. Perhaps no better a symbol of the crumbling Haitian sovereignty is the National Palace, which since the 2010 earthquake has still not been rebuilt. I rely quite a bit on the NACLA. I did in my last article too, but I'm doing it again here. And just a little background on them for those of you who like to audit your information sources, which should be all of you. The North American Congress on Latin America, NACLA, they are an independent nonprofit organization founded in 1966 that works toward a world in which the nations and peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean are free from oppression and injustice and enjoy a relationship with the United States based on mutual respect, free from economic and political subordination. Our mission is to provide info and analysis on the region and on its complex and changing relationships with the U.S. as tools for education and advocacy to foster knowledge beyond borders. So there's this article called "Haiti's Earthquakes Require a Haitian Solution," which is something I agree with wholeheartedly. But there's a picture here of the seismic activity from the earthquake August 14th, 2021, for those of you watching the video version. And so this article kind of talks about the U.S. history of intervention in the earthquake context. But as I said earlier, the United States, I'm sure the Marine response to Haiti, those individual soldiers are acting with benevolence in their hearts. I like to believe that, although, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, of course, people who don't want to be there, kind of the paternalism of the whole thing. But their efforts in providing and conducting direct medical care, aid, and rescue and reconstruction efforts, of course, that ranks among the very best things that the U.S. military does. And of course, that's relatively speaking, because everything that we're going to talk about in here, the paternalism that brings, and the influence and erosion of Haitian sovereignty that brings. So even so, remember, keep in mind, me being an anarchist libertarian, this effort comes with the caveat that the U.S. military and all this aid is funded at the involuntary and inflationary expense of the U.S. taxpayer. And need I remind everyone that we are now closing in on $30 trillion in debt, the national debt here. Now, as I say, the unfortunate combined effect of these efforts, these rescue efforts in Haiti, will be to sink Haiti even deeper into U.S. control and exploitation. And of course, that applies equally to the Organization for American States, which is a Western-led conglomeration of foreign governments who are controlling the Southern Hemisphere, at least, as it pertains to South America. To demonstrate this point, one must look at the orchestrators of the latest U.S. relief efforts. They are the very same forces that pillaged Haiti in the aftermath of the 2010 earthquake. And indeed, the newest iteration of Joint Task Force Haiti is led again by USAID. And USAID is a traditional front of the CIA that is used as the vehicle for regime change operations across the world. Now, you might not get the whole complete true story from the New York Times. However, I had a video called The Anti-Mainstream Media Bias, where I talked about how some people won't believe a word the mainstream media says, but the truth is that there's kernels of truth there. Here's an article, Secret Programs Hurt Foreign Aid Efforts. And in that, we get a kernel of truth. USAID was created in 1961 to help the United States win the hearts and minds of citizens in poor countries through civic action, economic aid, and humanitarian assistance. As a Cold War policy tool, the agency was at times used as a front for CIA operations and operatives. Among the most infamous examples was the Office of Public Safety, a USAID police training program in the Southern Cone that also trained torturers. So, of course, the author, Peter Kornblue, he follows this up by saying, well, of course, in the 21st century, USAID has overcome its tainted legacy and has undertaken humanitarian, political, and economic work around the globe. Of course, it runs democracy promotion efforts from Afghanistan to Kenya, building political leadership capacity, electoral education and registration programs, and judicial reform projects with little controversy. That's the New York Times spin. I'm sure it had little controversy I'm sure it was involved in Ukraine. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those things. But he says it is when USAID undertakes, quote, discrete regime change operations that it runs into trouble. Indeed, its Office of Transition Initiatives now seems to be competing with, or at least complementing the CIA on high-tech propaganda and destabilization programs in Cuba, if not elsewhere as well. Of course, it's not that that's evil, but he says, well, I mean, it doesn't really help U.S. foreign policy as a larger goal to do these. As well as, the USAID's legitimacy on their own core missions, which is to advance global health and economic welfare. Going further, the Gray Zone reports, that's Max Blumenthal and Ben Norton, they have a piece that they just came out with. Oops, that's in Spanish. This just came out July 25th. Cuba's cultural counter-revolution. U.S. government-backed rappers, artists, gain fame as catalyst for current unrest. So that was interesting as it comes up in Cuba. But here's a quote from that article. And again, remember that Cuba is pretty close to Haiti. Throughout the Cold War, here's a quote from their article, USAID worked alongside the CIA to liquidate socialist movements across the global south. More recently, it helped implement a phony CIA vaccination program in Pakistan to track down Osama bin Laden, but instead it wound up spawning a massive polio outbreak. So across Latin America, USAID has funded and trained right-wing opposition figures, including Venezuela's U.S.-appointed pseudo-president Juan Guaido. So then I go a little bit into the history of this. So USAID involvement in Haiti dates to at least the early 1990s. Now I did find some links on USAID's site as well saying that there were certain, I think, anti-malaria programs that were involved in Haiti since like 1976. So, but I couldn't, for this article, for the purposes of this article, I couldn't find much else in terms of like really, really bad clandestine regime change stuff. Now, I'm sure it's there. I just didn't have time to find it all. And for the sake of brevity in the article, I didn't really do a deep dive into that. However, I was able to find this. So USAID involvement in Haiti dates to at least the early 1990s. And this is an article I found on Pando from 2014 by Mark Ames. So I quote from that article. After populist candidate Aristide became the first democratically elected leader of Haiti in 1991, USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, another CIA front organization, and the American Institute of Free Labor Development began pouring money into Haiti in an effort that was, quote, specifically designed to fund those sectors of the Haitian political spectrum where opposition to the Aristide government could be encouraged. So this is a quote from, of course, this is from a book by Noam Chomsky, where he writes and he details his source of one of the closest observers in Haiti at the time, Elie Willens, wrote that USAID's huge, quote, democracy enhancement project was, quote, specifically designed to fund those sectors of the Haitian political spectrum where opposition to the Aristide government could be encouraged. Other U.S. policy choices were also directed to containing the threat of democracy that had made the wrong decisions. When a military coup took place a few months later, the Organization of American States imposed an embargo. Bush 1 announced that he would violate it, exempting U.S. firms. Now, under Clinton, trade increased still further. Bush and particularly Clinton also authorized the Texaco Oil Company to supply the military junta and its wealthy supporters with oil in violation of presidential directives, thus rendering the OAS blockade almost entirely meaningless. To me, it seems like what they do is they impose a blockade that means that only Haiti can trade with the United States. So soon after, in 1991, now again, Aristide won the election in 1990. In 1991, Aristide was overthrown by the U.S. in a coup d'etat. He would later tell two U.S. congressmen that he was, quote, kidnapped by U.S. troops after being told to leave the country, quote, to avoid bloodshed. Now, this is an article from CNN where this is being reported. Aristide says U.S. deposed him in a coup d'etat. The White House, of course, calls the allegation nonsense. But you do have that. You do have the corroboration from two U.S. senators who were saying that, yeah, he did call us up and say that he was kidnapped by U.S. soldiers. So we have this CNN article. Now, fast forward a little bit. In the wake of the 2010 earthquake, much of the work of coordinating the foreign recovery effort fell to Cheryl Mills, which I covered in the last episode on Haiti. Her role in the Clinton Haiti Task Force in the State Department. And Cheryl Mills was the personal attorney. She was a personal attorney for Bill Clinton when Bill Clinton, I believe during his impeachment trials. She was the head of the Clinton State Department's Haiti Task Force, even though she didn't have any experience in disaster recovery efforts at all. And Rajiv Shah was also, at that point, he was the head of USAID. And USAID and Cheryl Mills were the two, most of the work in coordinating the relief and recovery efforts fell to these two people, and neither of them had any disaster response experience. I'm quoting the Rolling Stone here, who did a large expose on, where all the funds went, the $13.5 billion in relief funds that was sent to Haiti in the wake of the earthquake. Quote, the result of Cheryl Mills and Rajiv Shah, Usaid and the U.S. State Department Haiti Task Force, the result was, quote, dysfunction like nothing else that Reconstruction officials had ever seen. Now I say USAID was utterly incapable of coordinating foreign aid groups with local and national Haitian government, who were either incompetent, corrupt, or completely overwhelmed. Reconstruction efforts lacked any clear strategy. And this is a quote from that Rolling Stone article, the, quote, action plan, while laying out the core priorities for Haiti's recovery, did not go into many specifics. That left Haiti's ministries to devise their own plans of accomplishing the goals and the thrust of what this action plan was, which had those core values, but no building blocks to get anywhere from there, no concrete steps. So 5 years and $13.5 billion later, and $1.5 billion of that came directly from U.S. aid. But 5 years later, Haiti had cleared rubble from the streets, but had not accomplished very much else. And adding insult to injury, the country was then suffering from a cholera outbreak that was caused by occupying UN military forces. Now, cholera, I believe, is the same thing that's going on in Yemen right now in response to the U.S. blockade of that country and its complicity in, more than complicity, blockading that country and supplying weapons, mid-air refueling, and targeting information and bombs to Saudi Arabia, who is committing genocide there. But cholera was present in Haiti. I believe there's still a large cholera outbreak in Yemen right now, but it is a disease that is effectively prevented with clean drinking water. And that's something that recovery groups clearly could not provide to Haiti if there's a cholera outbreak there 5 years after the 2010 earthquake. Now, of course, my one big complaint that I have with this Rolling Stone article is that it kind of chalks everything up to incompetence. And I think Occam's razor would say incompetence is the most likely explanation. But given the involvement of Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, which we'll get to in a second, I think it's a bit more sinister than that. And what I would call amounts to essentially the raping and pillaging of Haiti through these, a huge swindle, taking this $13.5 billion and achieving nothing with it. I had a story about the Red Cross where the Red Cross raised a whole bunch of money. I can't remember exactly how much it was. Let me see if I can pull it up. So yeah, here's a story about how the Red Cross raised $500 million for Haiti and built 6 homes. So here's a ProPublica article about that. So just a huge crime, I think, a huge humanitarian exploitation on top of a humanitarian disaster. And again, this is the context in which we are again sending U.S. aid to spearhead the recovery efforts from this latest earthquake. And of course, earthquakes will happen in Haiti, so this will not be the last time that this happens. This is just another iteration in the series. So of course, U.S. aid and other foreign recovery officials were quick to place the blame, I guess, on each other too, to be fair, but a large amount of the blame went on the Haitian people themselves and the Haitian government. And to be fair, maybe some of it is warranted. I don't know. I don't know how familiar I am with it. I say this is my libertarian editorializing, which I stand by 100%. But if I'm going to defend the Haitian government, I do so with this caveat, that the Haitian government, like the U.S. State Department, and all governments for that matter, suffers from the same fundamental issue that economist Ludwig von Mises illustrated in his piece, Economic Calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth. Now, this is known as the Misesian economic calculation problem, and it states simply that when the basis of economic calculation are removed by the exclusion of exchange and the pricing mechanism, by the exclusion of exchange and the pricing mechanism, a hopeless chaos is the expected result. That government, because it doesn't engage in the free market, doesn't have any pricing signals with which to determine where is the best allocation of resources, because that pricing and the profit incentive is a signal to producers that they are applying the aid to the best place, to the place where it is most needed. So with that caveat that all governments, any monopoly service that doesn't operate with the profit loss incentive suffers from that. That being said, it is no mystery why the Haitian government did not mesh well with the USAID plan, because it wasn't their plan. It wasn't the Haitian government's plan. This recovery plan was not the Haitian government's recovery plan. And here's a big quote from the Rolling Stone article, if you'll bear with me here. Now, immediately after the quake, in fact, Bill Clinton was not only talking about Haiti's reconstruction, but was casting the tragedy as an opportunity for the country to reimagine itself. Now, using a modified version of the Collier plan that had already been endorsed by both the U.S. and Haitian governments. Tried to reimagine itself using a modified version of the Collier plan that had already been endorsed by both the U.S. and Haitian governments. Now, when they say that, endorsed by the Haitian governments, it probably means that whatever puppet the U.S. put in power in the Haitian government gave their rubber stamp on that. So Clinton says, is it going to be hard? Yes, Clinton said in a teary-eyed interview with the Miami Herald. Do I think we can do it? Absolutely, I do. Now, around the same time, Hillary Clinton met in Montreal with representatives from a long list of donor countries and financial institutions to begin to plan for Haiti's reconstruction. Bill Clinton, meanwhile, attended the World Economic Forum. Does that sound familiar? In Davos, Switzerland, where he appealed to private sector leaders to invest in Haiti as part of what Clinton and others would call, quote, a new Marshall Plan. Now, a 56-page document known as the Action Plan for National Recovery and Development was released in March 2010. Its author was Haitian Prime Minister Jean-Max Bellerive, a European-educated technocrat well-liked by the international donors with support from officials at the World Bank and the UN. The vision represented a radically overhauled Haiti, a country bursting with mango processing plants, fish farms, solar-powered irrigation facilities, industrial parks, and duty-free zones, financed to a large degree by the private sector. The plan suggests social engineering on a vast scale, noted the Washington Post, which would involve levels of public and private investment in Haiti never really imagined before. Now, of course, the Rolling Stone tries to spin this as being some kind of fault of capitalism or fault of free enterprise. Now, of course, there might be people listening to this on Rockfin who are equally cynical about capitalism. And I don't like to use the term capitalism because lefties and libertarians such as myself would both condemn this situation. This is a bunch of Frankenstein-created big businesses that are completely exploiting Haiti. This is not free enterprise. This is development, the opportunity for development created by the U.S. State Department and other governments, bringing these corporations in for investment opportunities. This is fascism. This is fascism here. This is the government working in hand with the private sector. This is not a free market solution to this situation. This is a Frankenstein version of that. And it's despicable. So behind closed doors, this is the Rolling Stone article. Behind closed doors, the feeling of the Haitian government was that this was just another foreign group that they'd given permission to come in and take over their country. Now, that says, this is a quote from a senior international aid official. But what could the Haitians do at that point? The Haitian government knew it didn't have the capacity to tackle this reconstruction on its own. So I want to talk a little bit about solutions, but before I do that, I want to talk just a little bit about how you can support the Liberty Weekly podcast, and that is at libertyweekly.net/support. So if you click on that, you can see all the ways you can support this content. Of course, /Rockfin will bring you to my Rockfin landing page where you can subscribe there, but you can also subscribe on Patreon, Subscribestar, and Float.app. I have other ways too, like my Rakuten affiliate link, where you get cash back for shopping at a whole bunch of your favorite stores online, including eBay. So you'll get cash back. It's no cost to you. If you sign up with my affiliate link, /cashback, libertyweekly.net, spend $30 shopping, and the podcast will also earn $30. So check that out, libertyweekly.net /cashback. Also, you could leave me a positive review on iTunes and Google Podcasts. I really do appreciate that. It helps get the word out here. You can also subscribe, comment, like, share. All those good things helps me with the algorithms. Follow my work at the Libertarian Institute, because I'm also a part of the Libertarian Institute, at libertarianinstitute.org/Patrick. Other ways you can support: I have an Amazon wish list where I put in a bunch of books and equipment I'd like to get for the podcast. You can peruse that, and if you'd like to purchase something that will directly help this show, you can do that and it will be sent to me. Other ways: I have cryptocurrency. I appreciate cryptocurrency as much, if not more, than any fiat support. I have links to a bunch of cryptocurrencies that I accept on that support page, so you can go check that out. And on a more personal note, the podcast has really been getting recognition and picking up steam lately. So welcome and thank you to everyone who is listening to Liberty Weekly. I really appreciate it. It means a whole lot to me that you would take the time to listen to my content. And I really do appreciate it. So thank you so much. Continue listening, comment, sharing, subscribing, rating, review if you value this content. And we'll keep growing this thing together. So as I conclude in my article, as the devastation of the 2010 earthquake plays out once more in real time, USAID should not be trusted to once again coordinate the relief efforts of NGOs and the US military. Should not happen. They should not be trusted with this. Of course, that's with the caveat that the devastation is not as bad as 2010. However, this is going to keep happening again and again, and Washington is getting the effect that it wants, which I believe is to have Marines in Haiti, even if it's not politically tenable right now. The influence in Haiti needs to continue. Now, of course, this conclusion begs the question: if not the U.S. military and international NGOs, who will provide desperately needed relief efforts to Haiti? Because it is needed, and people should be providing relief efforts. Now, for this, I turn to the NACLA, and I link, their piece. Haiti's earthquakes require a Haitian solution here. And they report that individual Haitian communities must define their own priorities, and they must do so in coordination with local aid groups. And I think that local is the key here. Local and Haitian is the key here. So as the North American Congress on Latin America reports, there already exists a robust network of local humanitarian groups that are run by longtime Haitian professionals. These groups are trusted by their local communities and provide the most efficient help on the ground. Now, over and above organizations like the Red Cross, which I said, took $500 million and built 6 homes, these local aid groups are worthy of support. Now, here's a current list of those aid groups here, and I'm going to put this link in the show notes page if you'd like to do that. Another good way to do it is through DonorC. And DonorC is they're an organization that I've donated to myself. And the really cool thing about it is that you donate money and you donate it to specific projects which show up on the show. And that's because there's individual aid workers that are in country and they film what they need the money for. And once you donate the money, they fulfill the project, and then they'll send you a video or a photo of those people benefiting from the money that you donated. And their CEO has been sending emails specifically highlighting disaster response to Haiti and people that you can help out. And so I think it's a worthwhile project. It's been featured on Forbes, NBC, USA Today, The National Review, HuffPost, ABC, TEDx. So all these different things. And I think it's a wonderful program. But again, here are Haiti-based NGOs that are responding to the earthquake. So you have L'Ami Fund of Haiti, FOCAL, ORE, Foundation Paradis des Indiens. So there's a few on here. I would encourage everyone to go check that out. Now, for NGOs that do intend on providing aid, and this is foreign NGOs, NACLA has established these minimum standards for aid in response to harmful pitfalls that occurred during 2010. So one thing that doesn't help is disaster porn. And that's what I was talking about earlier, is that I don't want to, go into all the horrible, horrible things that are occurring, even though I'm sure of course there's horrible devastation there. And the reason why we don't want to do that is because we want to portray Haitian people with dignity here. We also want to invest in Haitian capacity. Support locally identified priorities is so important. Specify the project, local partners, and relationship that you intend on contributing to. Coordinate with or notify the relevant government ministry and local officials in Haiti. And also to register with OCHA, which works in direct support of the Haitian Directorate Civil Protection and the National Emergency Coordination Center, and let them know what the NGO is planning on doing. So I conclude, sadly, as the next few weeks play out, the U.S. military and international NGOs will likely repeat the fatal assistance of 2010. Regardless, the Haitian people must be given the respect and dignity to control their own destiny. Haitians and non-interventionists everywhere must insist on this. So with that, I conclude this episode on the recent Haiti earthquake. I'll be keeping an eye on this, and we'll probably revisit it in the future. Unfortunately, because the situation in Haiti, there's earthquakes, there's political instability, the U.S. is involved, all these other foreign countries are involved. And it's something I personally care about because I have members of my wife's family who are from Haiti, and some of them lived through the 2010 earthquake. So this is a very important subject, and I guess we should all do what we can. You know, focusing on Afghanistan is very, very important right now. But also, at least I didn't want to pick up Haiti during the assassination and then just discard it. And I think that the attention that was put into Haiti when the assassination happened, and there were articles out there about non-intervention in Haiti, just the way it is, the situation in Afghanistan, 20-year war coming to an end, it's very important to focus on that. But I didn't want to forget about Haiti. So I think we should all do what we can, tell people about what's happening there, talk about this situation, and talk about how U.S. and foreign aid is fatal assistance, and that we should listen to Haitians and identify these local needs on a local level and see what we can do to help aid groups that are already there and are in close support with locals there. So again, thanks so much for watching. I'm going to plan some Rockfin bonus content that will go up for Patreon subscribers. Oh, I almost forgot to mention too, a couple things. So I'd like to do a Patreon hangout in the next couple weeks here where all the patrons jump on a Skype call with me. We just get to know each other, get to talk about what's going on, and it's really fun. We've done one or two before, and it's always a blast. Have some people show up. So we record that and also put that out as bonus content. So I'd like to get to meet you if you want to become a Patreon subscriber. I don't know about Rockfin yet. I think I'm going to close it just to Patreon and Subscribe Star supporters. So if you'd like to do that, please go on over to patreon.com/Liberty Weekly, and the details will be there. Another announcement is I'm going to the Ron Paul conference, The War on Us. That's happening September 4th in Washington, D.C. There might be tickets available yet, so if you want to just Google The War on Us, Ron Paul, you can buy tickets from the Eventbrite site. So if you're going to be there, I know Scott Spalding will be there from the show that we just did. Our Marine friend Scott, he was been a guest on the show twice. And Joanne Leon will be there from Around the Empire, so I'll be excited to meet her. My first time meeting both of them in person, and so that's really exciting. All right, so that's about it from me. Show notes at libertyweekly.net/180. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.